From the high desert and the great American Southwest, I bid you all good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever the case may be, wherever you are in the world, all of which is covered by this program, Midnight in the Desert. My name is Art Bell, and we're going to have an interesting evening, I can tell already.
We certainly are. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Dave Schrader of Midnight in the Desert. Keith Rowland dug out one of the original openings by Art Bell. News came earlier this week. The final autopsy reports, of course, in on Art Bell, who had passed away from complications due to his COPD and high blood pressure and, unfortunately, a dangerous mixture of his own prescription medications. And the final word had come out, and we talked amongst ourselves at the Dark Matter Digital Network, and there was never really a final farewell show for Art because of the transition and things that had happened and Heather's grieving process. And we decided that now that the news has finally been released, we would tackle this evening and doing in a sense of light and in brotherhood and bring together a lot of Art's favorite guests and friends and bring us all together for one evening of memories. And tonight we've got a great lineup for you. Alan Corbeth is joining us in a little bit. Ian Punnett will be with us. Whitley Strieber, Richard Hoagland, William J. Birnes, and Karen Jackson. And then rounding out the show, Keith Rowland from the Dark Matter Digital Network, all telling their favorite stories and backstories behind the success and their friendships and knowledge and working with Art all of these years. And now joining us for the beginning of the show and in a real sense of brotherhood. And I was so pleased that he was willing to accept our invitation to come on this evening. And I know he's a busy guy. He's got another show that's going to be launching here very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to Midnight in the Desert, Mr. George Noory. George, thank you.
Oh, David, my pleasure to be on really a very sad moment as well. And I just want to quickly congratulate you on everything you've done, picking up the torch from Art and keeping everything going.
Well, George, you extended the torch to me with Coast to Coast and allowing me to become a part of that family, first as a guest and then becoming one of the regular fill-in guest hosts for 5 years. And that was a dream come true, the opportunity to sit in on the show that I fell in love with Art Bell and continued to follow and enjoy with you as well, and then to be a part of that family. And when this opportunity arose, I reached out and explained to you that this opportunity came, and you were just fantastic. You said, Dave, grab this opportunity, make it yours, and have fun with it. And you've been so supportive and checking in on me regularly through email to see how things are going. And, that says a lot. And I know there are a lot of people out there that are excited about you visiting with us and the fact that there's this nice bridge and hopefully a bridge that spans these two programs, bringing them together in a sense this evening. And you had an amazing opportunity as becoming the full replacement host for Art Bell when he stepped on. Was that strange? I mean, certainly you'd had a long and very big career doing radio, but then to kind of step into a show like this that already had such a following and such a preset nature, was it daunting at first to step in and do that?
No, it really wasn't. It was exciting to know that I was filling in for Art, and there's some great stories along the line. But I'll tell you really quickly, David, how this happened. And then, of course, this is your Art Bell tribute show, and that's the most important. But back in 1996, here in St. Louis, I had heard Art Bell for the first time. I was doing my own show with a lot of similar guests, but I didn't know there was really this syndicated show doing what Art was doing. And I heard that show, and I said, my gosh, I want to work with this guy. And I just started thinking about that. I wanted to work on Coast to Coast. I wanted to fill in for Art Bell. Art then resigned and was replaced by a fellow by the name of Mike Siegel. And we had been working with Mike out of St. Louis. He was on with ISDN lines. He was out of the Washington state area. And I gave him a tape, and I said, Mike, if you ever need a backup guy, please consider me. He gave it to Alan Corbeth, and Alan hired me right away. And he said, you're going to start filling in. And the first guy I filled in for is somebody who's coming up soon, Ian Punnett. And I just had that great relationship with Ian and Art. Art always used to tell me, George, be your own person. Just be your own person and don't copy me. And I went, no, Art, there's no way I can even try to copy you. And that metamorphosis continued and continued until Art decided that effective January 1st, 2003, he was going to retire again, but this time full-time. He was done. And then he came back part-time for us a little bit later on, and of course, you know the rest of the story.
I do, and it's been a wild ride all the way along, and that was great when I began filling in as a regular fill-in host for Coast to Coast. I remember the same advice you gave me, hey, have fun with it and just be Dave Schrader. And that information continues to pass on, and that's what I've taken to this show, is to bring the show and continue what Art started and the legacy that he had created, and just bring the show forward, doing the best I can as Dave Schrader, and you continue on as George Noory. And I think these shows will long outlive both of us, and that is a testament to the grand design of just how important it is to realize there's a big audience out there that doesn't always want to hear everything they can hear everywhere else. And if we continue to work in this field doing what we do, I think there's always going to be an audience interested in the fringe element and the anomalous phenomena that goes on in the world around us.
Well, Art tapped into that, David, and he felt it. He knew the pulse of the public at night, and he ran with it. He went from his political shows that he would do early on to the unusual, the supernatural, and the strange. And when we did our Art Bell tribute show on Coast to Coast, the Thursday after that Friday he had died, I pulled out a lot of old clips that Art had done, the guy flying over Area 51,
right,
and things like that. And it was just truly remarkable listening to these old clips. It was riveting radio. You would not stop. I get calls from people who would listen to Art in their car, in their driveway, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They couldn't get out of their car because they didn't have a radio in the house. So they stayed in the driveway just listening on. And his legacy that all of us have had that ability to work with is truly unmatched in radio history. Lots of great radio people have come and gone, but there was only one Art Bell, and it was a sad moment that night I was on the air, April 13th, that Friday, when we had to announce that he had died, and it was equally sad when we announced the toxicology report, because, it was senseless. I'm so opposed to heavy prescription drugs, and here again, overprescribed drugs have taken the life of another living institution. It
is. It's a shame and sadness, and I know that Richard Hoagland really wants to chat about that aspect, is that in Art's death tonight, we won't be lost in that as well, that there's a lesson to be learned, and we'll be discussing that a little later on with Richard on the show. I know you've got a program coming up here, and I want to thank you for stopping in and giving us a little bit of your time this evening and sharing some memories of Art Bell and the start of it all, and much continued success to you, George, and I look forward to a long, fruitful friendship as years come by. Thank you for being a part of our world.
Always. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What a nice surprise to have George Noory drop in. And I know many of you were shocked and surprised, but this was a long time coming. The past is the past, and these are the world that we live in, and bringing people together and bridging. That's where the future would be and where the future lies. And if there's one thing we can say about Art Bell, he was always thinking to the future. Joining us now on the program is Alan Corbeth. And fascinating to hear George bring up Alan as well, and talking about Alan's work and bringing George into the fold. Alan has worked in the broadcasting and recording industry for over 35 years, and he helped build the largest nationally syndicated overnight radio program in the country, Coast to Coast AM, with Art Bell and George Noory. Prior to that, he served as senior vice president with Premier Radio Networks. Thank you so much for joining us this evening in this night of memories, Alan.
Dave, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it, and it's a real pleasure to meet you also. I was so glad when you and Keith got together, and you agreed to do the show that you're doing now. I always enjoyed you when you were filling in for George.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Talk to me a little bit about your introduction to Art Bell and how you came to know this late night radio legend.
We were living on the East Coast, my wife and I, and we came to Oregon to build a radio station for a gentleman, and we started that project. The first thing both of us, being talk radio fans, would do all the time, anytime we were anywhere, is tune around the dial and start scanning and seeing who was on. And this was a new adventure for us because that was, I think, in the very, very late 80s. And we came across KDWN, and we stopped there and we were listening to a show. It was mainly political at the time, and it was a fellow called Art Bell. And he was on 50,000 watt KDWN, covering a good third of the country. And I listened to it, and I've said this before, it was a good show. It did not knock my socks off. I wasn't like, oh my God, it wasn't anything like that. But I liked it. And the next night we came back to it again, and I liked it a little bit more. And this went on for about 3 or 4 or 5 days. My wife felt the same way. And all of a sudden, it occurred to me, like, duh, this guy is absolutely dynamite. This guy's wonderful. He just had a captivating way of painting a scene. He truly was, the expression is overused now, but he truly created theater of the mind, which radio is very famous for. And we just really started to listen to him all the time. Well, the guy was building the radio station had dealings with KDWN and was going out to Las Vegas, and I went with him. And at that point, that was the first time I met Art. And we got on pretty well together, and I was saying, why aren't you syndicated? And he said, well, I am. And I said, well, tell me about it. And to make a long story short, there were several guys who were very nice chaps indeed, but certainly didn't know an awful lot about radio. And they'd found a couple of small stations that were taking the program from KDWN, and they were actually using a dial-up telephone line to get the program out there. So, I mean, the whole thing sounded like a phone call, and quite frankly, not even a good phone call from a technical perspective. So I met them, and they said, hey, will you do a little consulting for us? And I said, yeah, sure. The first thing we've got to do is figure out how to make the get over the technical obstacle. Art Bell himself is the least of our problems. He's self-correcting and one of the best broadcasters I've ever heard, and he remains that way today in memory. Anyway, we did a lot of running here to and fro, and found a Switch 56 line, which was kind of the first digital lines that they had running. And we were the first long-form people to use it. It was used for little short commercials and things. So we had it installed in KDWN, and we're actually feeding a pretty good signal to the few stations we had. And at that point, I started working on getting some affiliates for them, then got real busy and walked away from the program because we were ready to turn the radio station on. In the meantime, again, this is a very long story, and I'm compacting it. When I got back to looking at the show, they just weren't doing well, and it wasn't Art's fault. They just weren't getting a lot of affiliates. So I said, look, to the people I was involved with, whatever it takes, let's buy this show. It's going to be a hit. So people would credit me with, wow, he's a genius. Believe me, I'm no genius. I can tell you that 100 times over. But the one thing, I've never had a lot of supernatural experiences in my life or anything else, but from the minute I thought of syndicating Art Bell, I absolutely categorically, without any question anywhere, knew it was going to be a hit. And I didn't know whether we were going to make it start to make a big impression in 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, or 4, but I absolutely knew it was going to happen, and of course it did. Well, to make again a long story short, we ended up buying that program. Art and I worked continually together. He was always wanted to know exactly what was happening and how it was happening and when it was happening, and on it went. And I swear, we would talk sometimes a dozen times a day. And that was every day, and that was at least 5 or 6 days a week. And it was always like that. And we just set up all the proper functions. We had an affiliate relations department, marketing, and a sales department, and we just went ahead and built a whole network and trained a bunch of technicians and the whole 9 yards. And at that point, he was at KDWN. We ultimately moved him out of KDWN and built him a studio in his house. We put in a KU band uplink to get that back to Medford, where we were in Oregon. Then we put it on another KU band uplink and hopped it back to New Jersey, where it went up in those days on Satcom 5, which was the big broadcast talk radio satellite. So it took about 2 or 3 hops. We used to laugh about it because we almost had our built-in delay unit there by the time it left his mouth in Pahrump and actually got into the home radio. It had made several hops up and down on satellites. But that's basically how it started, and the program went from the west and started to move east, which is somewhat unusual. It usually goes the other way around. But he got tremendous ratings, and the program just spread. And, the biggest obstacle we had with it, Dave, was people, a lot of station owners in those days were treating overnight as just throwaway time, and it didn't mean anything. And, we reminded them that there was a huge audience out there of insomniacs, of policemen, nurses, doctors, firemen, newspaper people, delivery people, and there was just a whole cadre of people that would listen. We also reminded them that even if it's throwaway time and somebody fell asleep listening to your overnight show, they woke up listening to your morning drive show, which is the best place on the dial. So
that's right.
That's basically how it happened, and from that point, it just kept growing and growing.
The catalyst that ignited that candle. Joining us also on the line from Coast to Coast AM, and one of my dear friends, Ian Punnett, joining us now. Ian, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you, Dave. Shabbat Shalom, Alan.
Shabbat Shalom Lecha Punnett. It's by the way, it's very good. Ian's a great guy, and we had a lot of fun when we worked together. And it's an absolute pleasure. I'm going to shut up here and let Ian talk, but it's just such a pleasure to meet you, Dave, and to chat with Ian. And then I see later on you've got Whitley Strieber on, and Whitley is a tremendous guy and just a joy to be with. Richard Hoagland, and then ultimately Keith Rowland. And Keith was with us almost from day one, by the way. So Keith knows the ropes, and he knows his way around, and he's a talented guy also. Anyway, Ian, it's so good to hear you, and I will stop talking and listen to you.
Okay, you're not going to stop talking at all. In fact, with all apologies to Dave, let me just tell you, Dave, this is going to turn into be a valuable time capsule. Alan is downplaying his role in this, and appropriately, because we are talking about art, but there was much more to this than just the technical side of how Alan put it together. And in fact, I would tell you, and I've credited you many times for this, Alan, as you know, over the years. I mean, not only did he really, he gave the blessing for me to be there. Art gave a blessing for me to be there. I'm sure I wouldn't have continued, although I was brought on by the people at J-Corps in the early years when they had taken, control of Premiere, and they had suggested me. But, any of my success, Alan, on the show is about 20% art, it's about 20% Lisa Lyon, and it's about 60% Alan Corbeth. Because Alan's philosophy for the show is what stuck with me. And there's not a day goes by, Alan, when I was doing Coast, I didn't think about you. And I didn't think about the things you told me. And it's much more than the nuts and bolts, Dave. You got to understand, Alan understood the show at a granular level. And you told me so many things that became, for me, just the stars that I steered by. When it was a guest, when it was a topic, whatever it was, there was something you had told me, and some sort of maxim, some kind of guidance had come through from Alan that applied to every single thing I did. And if I wasn't doing the show right, I knew it because it wasn't following along a criteria that Alan had established for me in my mind of what makes a successful coast-to-coast show. And you know that's true, Alan. You have to take credit for that.
Well, I'm humbled to say the least. I'll tell you, it kind of works both ways, because you were an absolute pleasure to work with, and you were always upbeat and always willing to listen, and always willing to try new things. So it works both ways. And I also had a real good schooling in this, because I was, just as a kid, radio was absolute magic to me. I wouldn't go to sleep at night. I'd sit there with an ear by a radio by my bed, and I would listen to such greats as Long John Nebel out of New York City, out of WOR in those days, and Gene Shepard, who was also on WOR, and Jack Eigen, who came out of Chicago. And again, I mean, it was kind of my life, and I just naturally gravitated to it. So it was just something that was within me all along. Getting over to Art again, he was kind of the same way, and we both became ham radio operators, and were very active. I still am, and Art was right up until the end, and all of that. So I mean, it was just radio, and something occurs to me, if I can just take another couple of minutes, as a real interesting and wonderful memory. Art and I grew up, of course. He was in the Philadelphia area during some of his growing up days, and I was in upstate New York. And the big station we listened to, and it was just like, there was nothing in the world like this station, and it was playing rock and roll of the 50s and very early 60s, and it was WABC out of New York. Well, one day I get a call from Phil Boyce, who was program director at the time, and the program, we've been trying to pitch it to Phil and other people in New York, and it was starting to really catch fire, that program. So finally Phil called me and said, "Alan, I want to take the show." I said, "Fine. I couldn't be happier. Phil, this is the best news I've ever had." And he said, "But I want to take it tonight, and I don't have time to sign the contracts." I said, "Phil, take it. Take it with a contract. Take it without a contract. Just take it." So he said, "Okay, fine. Can you have Art give us a big welcome tonight? We'll be joining it when you go on the air." So I thought about that for a while, and I called. Art was married at the time. Ramona was still alive, his wife, and Ramona and I talked about it, and I said, you know, Ramona, this is something he's just dreamed about his whole life. Maybe we shouldn't tell him till right before the show, because he's going to worry about it, and he's going to be pacing, and he's going to get himself in all kinds of a mental state here. So she agreed. So at 10 o'clock, the news came on, and I gave him a call and said, "Okay, Ramona, it's me. Let me talk to him." So he gets on the line, and I say, "Art, I'm sorry to do this to you at the last minute." And at that point, it's like 3 minutes past 10. And I said, "Look, there was a late station. I forgot to give it to you. I've got to give it to you. Get your pad and pencil, and I'll tell you who the general manager is and the program director, and you got to welcome him." He said, "Oh, okay." So I said, "Well, let's see. The station is, let me see, WABC." And he goes, "Oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. This isn't real." I said, "It's real. Believe me, it is real." He said, "No, it can't be." All of a sudden, Art says, "Alan, I'm nervous. I don't know if I can go on." I said, "You've got to go on." And that was an amusing story. And of course, he went on and he was just thrilled and talked about it for 20 minutes. He gave Phil Boyce and WABC in New York City the best welcome any radio station ever had. But there's a boatload of stories like that. But there you go. And getting back to Ian, it's awfully good to hear you. It is.
Alan, that proves my point. That proves my point exactly. That the way you managed Art, and you know what I love, Dave, too, is that I would hear these stories all the time. Alan would tell me these great stories, and he would always say Bell. He would always refer to it as Bell. And he would just say, "You know what Bell does, or Bell said." And then he would tell me these great stories about the transition from when it was a political show, when it was just like 1 hour of kind of like, open lines, kind of paranormal stuff at the end of the show, and then all the way through to when it just flipped and then it completely took over and politics was gone by and large. But Alan, his understanding, the philosophical understanding of what the show is about, the theory behind the show, is something I think I I don't know, Dave, I think you and I talked about it once, but if I did, I hope I accredited Alan when I said it, which is that the first half of every great Coast to Coast show, Alan, do you remember these words, is there's no way this is true. This is total BS. There's no way this is true. This can't possibly be true. This is ridiculous. And then the second half of the show is, well, maybe. Oh, that's actually, yeah, that makes sense. Oh, my God. I mean, this could be true. This could be true. And it was that flip. It was that was the moment I went for with everything we did, regardless of whether it was alternative history, whether we were talking about alternative medicine, religion, whatever. It was always that allow it to be preposterous seeming at first, but never forget the fact that what we're doing was presenting information that was at its core credible, and that the show had to maintain its credibility too. You could not detach yourself from from being the maintainer of the credibility of the show and fall too deep in, but you had to always be there to guide the audience to the point where they get to going, by the time they turn off the radio, they're going, oh my God, what if that's true? And that was really all Alan Corbeth.
Guys, we are up against a break. Let's hold tight. We'll bring you back in. We'll continue this journey together, and the ride continues right here on Midnight in the Desert. We're back. This is Midnight in the Desert, the best in anomalous talk radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. On the line with us, Alan Corbeth, Ian Punnett, Whitley Strieber will be joining us in a few moments, but I wanted to wrap up with these two gentlemen as well. And again, Alan, remarkable story, and thank you. I'm seeing now just the power that was behind Art Bell, and that everybody needs that push. Everybody needs that one person that sees the potential in what this person is trying to do and pushes them over. And you are that guy. You were the catalyst. And thank you for making the night fun again, and for bringing our imaginations alive again by seeing what was in art and exposing it to the world.
Of course, the other side of that coin is, with somebody like Art Bell, how could you fail?
Right. Well, there's always that. Yeah, that's not a bad horse to be behind, is it?
And not at all. Not at all. You know, you got Whitley coming on, and it just brings back a memory, which maybe he may or may not want to talk about it. But we had one time Art and Ramona. Art was a huge fan of the film Somewhere in Time, and it just captivated him as time travel did, and he became a big Jane Seymour fan, and there was a big festival on Mackinac Island. So Art decided, we're going, and Art and Ramona booked the place, and they invited Whitley and Ann Strieber, and Ann was still alive then, of course, and she was a wonderful woman, and Whit, I don't have to tell you what a great gal Ann was. And so anyway, Ann and Whitley were there, and Bob and Sue Crane, of course, my wife Leonie, and I, we all went there and just had a real blast, and it was just a real good time. And it was a time that I had a chance to talk a little bit with Whitley. And I'll tell you something about Whitley, and I'll just tell you this: he is the real deal. Period. He's a brilliant guy. And he's been through a whole lot of experiences, and he's got an awful lot of wonderful and absolutely intriguing stories to tell. But of course, I don't have to tell you that because you already know it. So I was very lucky. That's all I'm saying. I have people like Whitley around. I have people like Ian Punnett around. No, it's very true.
You're lucky. But
that's all I can tell you.
Part, though, I say again, Dave, I just want to step in. So lucky, maybe to a point. But here's the point: is that the show when Alan was running a show that was on 7 days a week, actually 8 days a week in a way, because Art was doing. They were doing the replay show on Sunday night, and then he was doing the Dreamland show. And so there was a lot of booking to be done. And Art had been trying to do too much. And so part of it was, correct me if I'm wrong here, Alan, was the idea of sort of preserving Bell a little bit. So he wasn't going to totally burn himself out, which meant bringing on more people to do more nights. And
exactly
so
right.
There was always a backup. And one of my favorite things, I used to get, I don't know how many times, I would say probably 30 times, I would get a call while I was doing my regular weeknight show, and it would be from Alan. He's going, hey, Bell's back is out. Can you go on in an hour? and it happened. But there was this was the point. He had to keep a team together, and he had to find both the guests and the hosts and match up the chemistry, along with some good help from Delaney and right? I can't remember. Is that Delaney and Lisa? I can't remember. Wasn't it Delaney, one of the first producers?
Oh yeah, it was Delaney Conrad at the time. Yeah. She's now Delaney Castle, and Lisa Lyon. Lisa's still the senior person on that show now.
I talk to her 5 times a week. She's like my sister.
Yep.
But anyway, that was it. You did more than just that. So you kept a show and you built a show. I know you got to get to Whitley. Any stories I have, Dave, about art, probably 70 of them come from Alan when we would talk frequently during the week, and he would tell me something great, and I would, anytime you want, we'll happy to go and talk more about it. But Alan's the guy who knows everything, and Whitley is the real deal, and it was a pleasure to share a mic with all of these people and to keep, in my opinion, Alan, and you can correct me on this if you want, but to keep the tourists out of there, the people that weren't really committed to the topics, that just liked the mojo of being on a big station network kind of thing like that. You screen those people out, and the people that want to use it for their own political purposes. And what I really like from the very beginning, the show was about all of the listeners. There was nothing. Sometimes other shows could get anti-Semitic, or they could dabble in racism or other stuff, and we never let any of that on the air. And I've always loved you and admired you for that.
Well, it's that part of it is true, and there you go. It worked, and it worked very well. But again, don't overcredit me, guys. I had a great team all along.
No,
Alan Corbeth, thank you so much for joining us, Alan, and again for being the light that helped push art further into this. And Ian, before we let you go, I want to hear you give me one of your favorite stories of Art Bell directly, and then we're gonna be joined by Whitley Strieber here in just a few seconds.
Well, I hope, Alan, I hope your wife is well. And I know that, so at some point we'll have to get together on the phone because I got a lot of catching up to do. Let me just say, so I loved this about Art. He was very, at one point when Ramona had passed, he was done with radio for a while. And then he wanted to come back. And he wanted to come back only one night a week. And he wanted to come back on my night. Which at that time was Saturday night. That was my regular night. And I was, because of Alan too, I was the first person other than Art, I was the first person to ever get the badging of Coast to Coast AM with Ian Punnett. I wasn't with Art Bell, and filling in for Art is Ian. He made that happen, which I really loved. But it was the fact that Art was concerned about my feelings. He wanted to come back, and it was handled so beautifully. And it was one of those collegial moments where he could have Bigfooted it, and he could have said, I'm coming back, clear the way, but he didn't. He wanted to make sure that I was okay too. And it made it so easy to step aside for him, to give him Saturday night back. They gave me something else to do on Coast to Coast for a while. And then when Art really wanted to move on from that, I came back on and started my Saturday night show again. But it was only because of how sweet he was about it that made that happen. And I've always admired him for the way he handled it. So there you go.
Well, it's been one remarkable man after another involved in this program with Alan and you, Art Bell, of course. And I just want people to know that it was with your prodding and your backing of me that helped get me involved in Coast to Coast. And when you were stepping down to deal with your future, you were right there pushing and talking to Lisa and people to bring me on board. So thank you for making that step and helping to help make my dreams come true as well, to be a part of something so remarkable like that. So thank you, Ian, and thank you for being a friend.
You would earn that. We will always be friends. Thank you for having me on. I'm telling you, you've got something in this show. People should be listening to this for a very long time. Anybody wants to understand Art, and they're about to get another lesson from Whitley. My blessings to him. And also, you've got RCH coming up too. So when you talk to Richard Hoagland, give him my love. All right.
I certainly will. Ian Punnett, thank you very much. You can catch him on Coast to Coast AM. He is back, sitting in and filling in on weekends as well. Now joining us for the remainder of this segment, Whitley Strieber, the author of Communion is here to chat with us. He was a friend of Art Bell's, very close friend, favorite guest, and of course, the host of Dreamland. Thank you so much for joining us, Whitley.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here and to be talking about art.
How did your first introduction to art happen?
My first introduction to art came after I had been on a late night radio show with Larry King. Larry King used to have a show on the Mutual Radio Network after he did his TV show on CNN. And I went on CNN with him, and then I did an hour or so on the late night radio show. And as I recall, it's been a long time, I got a call or an email maybe from Alan or Art asking me if I would do their show. And I listened to it, and it was really wild, and I thought, gee, that sounds like fun. It sounds like a place where I could really tell my story. And I'd been out there with the communion thing for a few years at that point, and hardly ever been able to tell the story straight as it happened, because they all wanted to tell their version of my story using my voice. And so I was very controlled. And suddenly here was this guy who was going to just let it happen as it happened and let you tell your story and say what you wanted to say and not interrupt you and not be cynical or laugh at you or anything like that. And that was an amazing experience. The energy on that show was fantastic, because for the first time, for better or for worse, people were being allowed to say things that they hadn't been allowed to say anywhere else on the radio or anywhere, because it was all so carefully curated. And he was getting people who were saying things that the conventional wisdom said were impossible and were completely crazy, like me. Only what happened to me.
Right, and giving you that chance to step up and share your story without judgment, without critical, comments or such, but allowing you to share and make that story open and your world open to us.
Art Bell and I were friends for more than 20 years, and in all of that time, I never knew, as a friend in any way, what he thought of my story. He never said, I think you're telling the truth. I don't think you're telling the truth. He never did. And I don't think he ever did to anyone, unless once in a while there would be a guest so far out that even Art couldn't handle it. And that's when the show would get hilarious.
Right.
But for the most part, Art was a listener. He was one of the world's great genius listeners, one of the finest listeners who ever walked the face of the earth. And as I say, we had a very close friendship for quite a while. And he was, I never said, Art, do you believe me? But because it wasn't the kind of question I wanted to ask him. I felt like I needed to leave that space empty, because that was how Art was. He wanted to be a neutral when it came to all of this stuff. What he personally believed or didn't believe, I don't know to this day. I don't even know much about Art's political positions. I know he was sort of a libertarian, I guess, but he was very private about that stuff. And I admired that about him, and I admired his ability to listen. And he would also sometimes become convinced of things that I thought were completely fallacious. Only I couldn't tell, and no one could tell, whether or not he was really convinced of them or he was simply trying to draw somebody out. Art gave us a new kind of freedom. He said, let's let people who don't get a hearing. Let's give people who don't get a hearing, give them a chance, and see what they have to say. And all of these extraordinary people came onto that show, and it became one of the best things that's ever happened, and certainly on radio. But it changed the culture, and it changed the way we think, deeply and fundamentally. And I thought it was just wonderful. I loved Art. I thought he was so terrific.
And I remember you could hear that. You could hear that as well as a listener, and that's where we fell in love with Art. And I remember being one of those guys sitting in the car listening and not wanting to step out of the car because I didn't want to miss a minute of the way not only guests like you would share a story, but the way he found a way to pull the best out of guests and bring you to a point and share what maybe you wouldn't have spoken about with anybody because you felt like you weren't talking to Larry King. You weren't talking to Dan Rather. You were talking to Uncle Art, right? You had that friend, that person that you could talk to anybody about.
Somebody who was going to listen without judgment. And there was so much fun on the show. I remember JC and Mel's hole and all that stuff.
Right.
I mean, that crazy stuff was a big part of the show. I've always suspected that I know the person who was JC.
What?
It was an act. It was not a real person in my opinion, and I think I know who it was.
And that was the theater of the mind, right? Finding a way to engage the audience and take them out of the doldrums of everyday radio and involve them and make them feel like they were a part of something wonderful and magical and what if. And I think that's a big aspect of this, right?
Which they were, and that magic was there. It was a very exciting. And God, I can remember. I remember one night on the show, I fell asleep when we were in the middle of the show, and I hear this beep beep. I wake up and holy moly, I'm still on. I'm alive. And Art says, "Are you asleep?" No, I wasn't asleep, Art. He says, "I guess that was just a long silence, Whitley." I guess it was, Art. I didn't know what I was saying. Off we went down another road. But the thing was, and this was what was so exciting, he enabled me, he gave me a chance to tell my story from my gut, not the story that was being curated by some producer, but what I wanted to say from down deep inside. And the listeners, they got that. And that was important because I have an extraordinary story, and it's a true story. But I can't tell you for sure what it's about. I've never known for certain. Did I get abducted by aliens or something else happened? I don't know. And Art's reaction to that was, okay. But most of the media people, if you said that, they'd tear into you because you were supposed to be alien abductee Whitley Strieber. And if you said anything that suggested anything different, then you're a liar. That was the response. But from Art, the response was, oh, you don't understand what happened to you. No, I don't, Art. Well, okay, then what do you think that means? And then you go even deeper. That was the brilliant thing about Art. He could do that.
And When you were talking to him about that, were there realizations that in those conversations with Art you realized and you had that really kind of opened up the paradigm for you of different beliefs and maybe what had happened to you that maybe gave you a different perspective on a way to look at these? And what were some of the biggest revelations you think you've gotten because of your friendship and the many interviews you've done with Art?
What happened? It's hard to say what the biggest ones were. I think that maybe the most important one was that it was okay to have questions. And it was okay to think of a thing that had happened in one way and in another way. In other words, when you have something happen to you that's very traumatic and very strange, it's extremely hard for the mind to pin down exactly what happened. But you have all of these people screaming at you, oh, well, he said the walls were gray in this interview, and in the other interview he said they were blue. He must be wrong. He must be crazy. He must be lying. They're doing anything they can to push away the threat of the unknown. Art didn't do that. He didn't come after you that way. What he wanted was more story, and that made you dig deeper. And I came to certain realizations about my story that it would never be a perfect story. There would always be ambiguities connected with it. Always. And I accepted that. And that happened to me because of being on the show and my relationship with Art. And it freed me very deeply to explore my experience more profoundly than I had ever thought possible.
Talk to me about the transition into Dreamland and working with Art on that. And was that something that you had even conceived ever doing and becoming a radio host in a programming like that?
Oh, yeah. I love radio. And, Art said, Whitley, you love to talk. You're a natural radio person. I said, I know. I've always wanted to be on the radio. And so he decided that I would try out and do a show on Coast, but only for part of the country. I was only in part of the country, and he was in the rest of it. And he said, well, who's your guest going to be? And I chose a certain astronaut. And Art says, well, he's kind of difficult to deal with. And I said, well, I know him well. And I know all the incredible things he's seen and talks about. And we'll talk about him. He said, don't be too sure of that. This is a guy who talked about all kinds of extraordinary things that he had seen and so forth. And I get him on the show, and I've written out this enormous list of questions because it's my first time on Coast, my first time doing radio.
Right.
And I go through it, and his answers, instead of like they were when it was in person, are just, yep, nope, no, not sure. And, the first segment is half over, and I've finished all my questions. I have nothing further to say, nothing further to do. And then I'm back on the air with him. It was very, very difficult. So difficult that midway through the second hour, I became incapacitated with stomach pains. I had to quit. And they asked me to play an old show for the rest of it. And I went back to the hotel we were in and sat in a hot tub of hot water. It was just appalling. And so Art calls me and he says, you got a good voice, but you need to calm down a little bit. I did I think another guest host, and then he asked me to be on Dreamland. And Alan Corbeth was great. He helped me a lot, giving me the basics of talk radio and how to ask the questions and how to make the guest tell a story and how to handle guests that aren't good, and how to when you see a guest that's got a lot of potential, and how to draw them out. And he was a master at all of that. He was really very, very good. And Dreamland went great on premiere for a while, but then the economics of it didn't work. Unfortunately, because it was it was shouldering onto Coast, and it just didn't. It did not get the kind of clearance. It had clearances in only about 400 stations, and it wasn't making the money that they needed to keep it going, and so they dropped it. But I'm still doing it because it does plenty well on my website.
Certainly does.
Unknown Country. Yeah, and I do it as a weekly show, and it's really popular, and it's been going. I don't think in all of the years I have been doing that show that I have ever missed a single week, and I never will, until I finally join the great chorus in the sky. So.
Well, I hope that's no time soon. Whitley Strieber, thank you so much for giving us your time this evening and for your recollections and memories of Art Bell and for helping us be entertained all these years as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will be back, and when we come back, Richard C. Hoagland, William J. Birnes, Karen Jackson next on Midnight in the Desert. Welcome back to the show. This is Midnight in the Desert, your home for the best in anomalous talk radio 5 nights a week. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Tonight, the Art Bell Tribute Show. And we've got a cavalcade of stars that are joining us this evening, friends and guests of Art Bell, and sharing memories. Right now, joining us on the line, Dr. William J. Birnes is a New York Times best-selling author and ufologist who has written and edited more than 25 books covering subjects of human behavior, true crime, current affairs, history, psychology, business, computing, and, of course, the paranormal. He has worked as the creator, consulting producer, writer, and lead host of History Channel's UFO Hunters. He is a co-creator and guest expert on history's ancient aliens, and was currently featured as a commentator on Discovery's Unsolved NASA Files. All right, I believe we're back on and live. This is the joys of live radio. You never know what's going to go on, and I guess it wouldn't be a Midnight in the Desert and a tribute to Art Bell without weird things going on. So now joining us online, we've brought everybody together in one place, and we've got Richard Hoagland online with us, an American author, radio host of The Other Side of Midnight, and a proponent of various conspiracy theories about NASA, lost alien civilizations on the moon and on Mars, and other related topics. Dr. Bill Birnes with us as well, as I was introducing before the fates so cruelly interrupted and threw us off into space. We'll start off, Richard, visiting with you for a few moments and join in with Bill as this segment progresses. So thank you for joining us this evening, Richard, and coming in to share some thoughts and memories on Art Bell.
If I can make just one small correction, I also worked for Cronkite during the heyday of the American space program, was a NASA consultant, was head of special affairs at the Hayden Planetarium, and nominated for a Angstrom Medal. So, conspiracy is not my life. It's what I found when I was pursuing my life.
Right. It's one of those facets that opened up to you. And man, what an interesting pedigree and history to come with. How did you, if you don't mind, get involved in working in your introduction to Art Bell?
I was trying to think about that I've been thinking about it for the last couple of months, since he died. It's like, there are some people that you kind of think you've always known them. And of course, with Art, that's not true. I think the first time that he wanted me on his show, he called a gal in Seattle named Laura Lee. Do you know Laura Lee?
I do not personally know.
Okay. Bill, Laura. Sure. Yeah. She was a major radio personality, female in this business, which is very tough. And I was doing her show, and I was in Seattle because I was doing some speaking or something. And Art reached me through her home phone. And I wound up literally, sitting on the floor in her den doing my first Art Bell show when they were on the small, kind of almost local network. And that was the beginning, as many people have said, Casablanca, a beautiful friendship.
And when you talked with Art Bell in this program that was worldwide and people are listening in and hearing these stories and giving you a place to come and a forum to talk about this, was that something, I mean, as we were just kind of talking with Whitley, kind of a different perspective than working with the regular media who might be more pressing for hard answers? Was it a kind of a relief to have a place to go to share the thoughts and beliefs and ideas of what was going on and have somebody go along that ride with you?
Well, Art didn't go along. Art gave you space, but he would come back. He would, let's say these days in politics, he would push back on many ideas and many discussions, and that was part of the fun of doing Art. He wasn't, your average potted plant. He was an incredibly intelligent, sharp, focused radio guy who let you say your piece, and then he would converse with you like an adult on points that supported what you were saying and points that he felt didn't support what you were saying. It wasn't Joe Pine. It wasn't the shriekers on talk radio in the previous couple of decades. It was an intelligent, interesting, Long John Nebel level conversation,
right,
in the late 20th century. And I mean, he gave me an extraordinary platform to lay out all this data and all the, basic adventure of figuring this stuff out and discovering almost in real time how much NASA, the deep state, which is the familiar phrase now, right, has been lying to us about everything. It's not just NASA. I mean, we were at the cutting edge, but now if you look at mainstream news, there's all kinds of stuff. Where are 3,000 missing kids tonight? Actually, it's down to 572, but our government has sanctioned the kidnapping of babies. If Art was alive and on the air, he would be livid. He would be in the stratosphere because his mantra was all the news that's fit to talk about, and that's everything. And he did not really make that hard demarcation between normal and paranormal. And in case you haven't looked around lately, David, the paranormal has taken over the normal. I mean, there's 24/7 paranormal now all over every media we're looking at.
Right. It's become the normal. It's become water cooler topic instead of feeling like everybody's pushed to the corners and in the dark realms to talk about this. But
Art predicted it. The key thing is he had a very famous phrase back in the mid-'90s when he and I hooked up. I forget the exact year because, again, it's like I've known him forever. But he coined this phrase, the quickening, which I really resonated to because it matched the rise of this background physics I've been researching and talking about for years and years and years, the hyperdimensional torsion field model, which predicts there would be a rise reaching a crescendo in this physics somewhere around the turn of the century. Turns out that we were all wrong by about 6 years because it was 2016-17 when the actual 2012 alignment date, the Mayan end of the Mayan calendar, actually really occurred. We all discussed all of this stuff decades before you can now tune on CNN and MSNBC or Fox and see the world totally, totally upside down. I mean, we are living tonight in a government where you have the government saying one thing about Russians and meddling and all that, and you have the president saying something totally 180 degrees opposite, and they're within hours of each other. The president representing his administration, everybody he picked for his guys in the cabinet are all saying one thing, and he's saying something else. And this is so out of the other side of midnight realm. This is Never Land. This is why your show, I mean, go look at TalkStream Live. How many shows are there out there now dealing with the, quote, paranormal? Because the paranormal has become incredibly, achingly, bizarrely, bewilderingly normal. That's insane.
Right. Become part of the lexicon, part of the paradigm of our reality. And that was a shift as Art saw that in the past. And he knew, again, that's what made Coast to Coast and Dark Matter and Midnight in the Desert so good, was he saw what was coming. He knew how to anticipate these things and was kind of riding that curve, I think, into the future.
The lingering echo of Art, will be with us forever, of course, is how much did he really know? Was he really plugged in? Did he have sources? Did they use, like Chris Carter on X-Files, did they use Art to basically blow the whistle on a whole bunch of Black Ops, deep state stuff? And at the end, did Art really die of an accidental overdose of those medications? I mean, I don't know whether I'm the first to ask the question, but given what I know about what he knew before anybody else knew it, that question tonight, when we live in a government it's insane, has got to be asked and answered.
I think there's been a lot of thoughts regarding Art's passing, and again,
it's
partly
just
why
too
we
goddamn
waited.
Convenient. Sorry for my French. Art lived with medications and with, distress on the part of Ramona and himself to a lesser degree for years and years and years. He was a sharp guy. Robin talked to him extensively about his health. He knew you don't mix medications. This wasn't the era of Dorothy Kilgallen, who also died of aspirin, not aspirin, but something else in alcohol. Remember her, the great investigative reporter?
Right.
Back in the 50s. So Art's passing goes for me from sad to what the hell really happened? Because his whole sojourn, coming back on Dark Matter, having an incredibly successful show, then having to leave the air under the most bizarre. Remember, he left the air, David, under totally, totally bizarre circumstances. And that's how Heather got to take over his show, under bizarre circumstances. And then she is left under bizarre circumstances. And you've taken over under bizarre circumstances. Does anybody see a trend curve here?
There does seem to be a lot of strangeness and
as Linda would
background
say,
to this.
high strangeness.
High strangeness. Now, with Art's life, though, and coming into the end of his life, he was also dealing with a lot of physical issues and ailments. And I know that you had wanted to talk about the importance, too, of mixing drugs and pharmaceuticals and how that can affect us.
If this was an incredible, tragic accident, it means that Art fell victim to this epidemic, which is sweeping the country, the opioid crisis. I mean, you have big pharma pushing major medications that are killing people.
Right.
Our friend Art is an example. If he hadn't mixed the OxyContin with the Valium, with the cocktail that the sheriff's office has reported is nuts. Nobody would do that unless they were in terrible pain under a doctor's medication. Remember the doctor who killed Michael Jackson? Whether he did it deliberately or by accident, he was an idiot, right? So just because you wear a white coat doesn't mean you're God or you know what you're recommending to your patients. Robin has told me for years that I've seen example after example of mainstream medicine killing more people sometimes than it can save. And it's because doctors have this mindset that they're God. And they do not rearrange that mindset very easily. So I can see I have no idea personally who Art had as his, family doctor or whatever, whether his health plan allowed him to stay with all those uncertainties. But bottom line is, the report now is that he died of an overdose of common recommended medications by the mainstream medical community. And I imagine that he never thought that this would happen again if this is accidental as it has been represented to us.
And I know people need to be more cautious, have to be more careful. And I know Bill's written books about Dr. Feelgood and talked about the medical industry out there and how they do run roughshod and there's no real accountability. And it is sad and tragic, of course, with the passing of Art Bell and the way that it all happened. And it also leaves many of us wondering if it was his decision with dealing with the medical issues and maladies that he had to take it in a way that it was dignity in his choice and not to slowly allow COPD to ravage him and destroy him.
Well, as far as I know, Art had no debilitating diseases. He had stopped smoking, or was really trying to stop smoking, but he left the air under very strange circumstances, and who knows what happened. Did his life take a downward spiral? Was he forced off the air? I guess, David, that's what I'm asking. Is the real culprit here the situation that aborted Art's comeback and forced him off the air under the most bizarre circumstances, leaving the field before we win? Because we're very close to winning. You do know that, right? We are a whisker away from winning everything that he and I and Bill and all the other people out there who work in this field have tried for decades to uncover. We're very, very close to winning. And it's just a tragedy to me that Art can't be here to enjoy what he worked so hard to bring about.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Richard, and sharing your thoughts and stories with us about Art as well, and raising some important questions and giving people something to think about, which, again, we talk about legacy on the show. That's part of what he's always been a part of and always will be a part of. And I thank you for your time. And I know that it was hard for you to do this as well, and that you've lost a friend in the loss of Art Bell. So thank you for your time this evening, sir.
Well, I thank you for inviting me, and for all the audience who wants to see what I've been doing on the other side of midnight, Saturday night and Sunday night, 9 p.m. Pacific.
Thank you very much. Richard C. Hoagland, always a favorite and a pleasure to speak with you. Joining us now, we've got Bill Birnes, a good buddy of mine, and such a pleasant guy to talk with. He's got amazing stories, and you've got an interesting story, Bill, as we introduced you at the beginning of the segment, and background. But talk to me about the launch of your book, The Day After Roswell, and those conversations you had with Art Bell, and how this all came together for you.
Sure. Art had the ability. Art had a lot of very native abilities and very nurtured abilities. And one of the abilities that Art had, which amazed me, was that he could take his listeners anywhere with his voice. So if Art was incredulous, he didn't have to go over the top. He could simply, almost on the air, raise an eyebrow, and you know that he was querulous about something. If he were fascinated by a story, his voice would tell you he was fascinated. But whether he was incredulous, skeptical, or fascinated, Art never broke stride when he was on the air. So everything was calm. It was his voice that carried you through the night, and his voice that carried you through the conversation with the person that he was his guest. So, but it was that voice that did it. And when Day After Roswell was launched, this was in July 1997, at Roswell, at the 50th anniversary of Roswell. So it's a big festival. A lot of people were there, and it was funny on three things. One, this was a publisher's launch. This was a Simon & Schuster book launch, which meant there was a publicity person there. There was a senior editor looking over her shoulder. Everything was coordinated down to the second. Interviews with various places, UFO magazine, this magazine, that magazine. And one of the funny things was that the last event was going to be on that Sunday night on Dreamland with Linda Howe, was introducing the book to the UFO late night radio community via Art Bell. And for Phil Corso, my co-author, this was a shocker, because for all his years in the Army, for all his years doing whatever he did, this kind of publicity was brand new, because in real life,
the secret of Philip Corso was that he was the little man who wasn't there. You look around the room and you notice that Corso was not there. You're having a conversation, you thought you were talking to Corso, but suddenly he's not there. That was my experience in years leading up to the books being published. So for Phil Corso, coming up on, was he 79 years old, or he was 80 years old, this was brand new. His son did not know, and this is one of the things that the kid admitted to me when we were down in Florida with the motion picture company and me talking about the final manuscript. The son didn't know that's exactly what his father did. I mean, Phil maintained that he had top secret clearance all the way to the top, that he couldn't talk about his job with anybody, and then when his boss, Lieutenant Arthur Trudeau, died, that's when he could talk about the book. All of this, like a traveling show.
Right.
Phil, son, wife, grandchildren, all traveling to Roswell on the 50th anniversary, in tow with a publicity person from Simon & Schuster. And for the first time also, the family was seeing the father being taken dead seriously by a community. That was a shock, because they were seeing copies of the book, advanced copies of the book had come out, and they had gone on sale that day, where people were dog-earing pages, putting little Post-its in the pages. There were bookmarks. I remember that Linda had the entire book bookmarked, pencil marks for questions, all set to be interviewed on the Art Bell show. Well, a moment of panic set in, because everybody started yelling at each other. We're trying to calm everybody down. This is a radio interview. It's going to be a couple of hours. Yeah, it's late at night. A couple of hours, you're off the air. And all of this was kind of back-channeling to Art while it was happening. So he knew all the tumult that was going on in the hotel as everybody was fighting each other. We're trying to find a room where they could be quiet, a lot of pounding on walls, pounding on doors. Art's aware of all this. He's on the line. The show starts. We finally get Phil Corso in a room with Linda, lock the door, lots of pounding. My wife is outside. She's calming down the family. It'll be over in a little bit. Calm down, calm down. Nobody's going to make a fool out of your father. Don't worry. We know he's old. It's okay. When Art started the show, there was not a hint that this is live crazy radio and everybody's insane. Not a hint of that. A voice as calm as a lake on a summer morning. That was Art's voice, just completely calm, slowly introducing. And Art, to his credit, since he knew what he was doing incredibly, had this whole thing measured. Art basically said, folks I'm sure they can hear this interview. It's still somewhere in the Coast to Coast files, basically introducing a story. And the thing that made Corso so intriguing to the UFO community, at least back in 1997, was at that point, this was officially the highest person, the person of the highest rank, the most inside guy, the most inside person to ever talk about not just a rumor he heard, not just a story told from General Smith to General Jones.
Right, this was firsthand.
To put his hands on this material and have a brain trust. This was the scientific division of the foreign technology division of the Army R&D, have them actually confirm where this stuff came from in the first place. And that was Herman Oberth.
Remarkable. We have to take a break, Bill. Stay tuned. We'll be back. Bill Birnes, our guest, will also be joined by Karen Jackson next on Midnight in the Desert. This is the best in anomalous talk radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. This is Midnight in the Desert. My guest, Bill Birnes, joining us in a few moments. Karen Jackson will be on with us as well. And Bill, I wanted to wrap up with you on this as you're talking. I mean, you come with this amazing story. You bring it to art. And as you said, most people might take this with a shock value or corny it up, but art took this very soothing approach as though this is what it is and presented it. And for you, I mean, was that kind of a revelation as well to hear somebody that could take this kind of topic and do with it what he could?
Oh, sure. It was fascinating to watch artwork or to listen to artwork because he hadn't just read the book. He understood, and this was important for what art did, art understood the import of the work for the community that he was talking to at the time he was talking to them against the background of everything they and he had talked about over the years. So you're looking at the book against the background of a Stan Friedman, a Richard Hoagland, a Don Schmidt, Kevin Randall, all the people that were out there talking about this topic. And what Art did so skillfully was that he knew this wasn't a book about Roswell. That was one of the first things, and he actually stressed it. This is what happened to all the stuff as it sat there in a file, or the stuff the Army had, in a file in the Pentagon after the first integrated circuits went over to Bell Labs. And so for Art, this was a puzzle filling in a blank space that Art knew had to have been there, but didn't know how to fill it or who could fill it. And so that was how he treated that show. And based on that show and based on the way Art handled it and handled questions from the audience and then handled comments from other guests talking about Corso's story, well, the book hit the bestseller list and stayed there throughout that entire summer.
Unbelievable. What a power he could command and bring to the audience and bring to the world. You had a chance to talk with Art about his physical issues and problems as well. And was he pretty forthcoming with you about that, Bill? Yeah,
because there were two backgrounds to the conversations that we had. Art had given me a cover quote for the book on UFO hunters that I wrote. And then we began talking about books, and Art had been wildly successful with The Day After Tomorrow with Whitley. And then one of the things that, so there were two prongs. One prong was Art and I were always talking about books. So we'd email each other, we'd talk on the phone. And then my wife Nancy was doing the music logging for the Art Bell show on this network. So there were these two prongs, and one of the things that I was trying to get from Art were his feelings about Long John Neville, because Art was historic in the medium that he was in. I mean, he really was an historic figure. He was a transition between, remember, Long John Neville in the late 50s through the early 60s, of course, he had his own personal stuff with Candy Jones, but Long John introduced a lot of this to a public on terrestrial radio. What Art did was that he didn't see this as just the paranormal. I think Richard made the point, or someone did, that he put the normal back in the paranormal. What Art did was he didn't treat it like, oh, this is a human interest story. Oh, this is from the world of Weird and Wacky. Oh, this is from the world of Strangeness. Art treated this as normal. And when you heard him talk about a story, you heard him talk about something that even if he didn't believe it 100%, treated it with the respect that you treat something that's normal. Well, that's different from the way Long John handled it. Long John believed nothing. He would, if you talk to him privately, he would tell you this is a lot of bunk. Art didn't do that. Art was very different. And so what we were talking about was, in the context of everything else, doing a book about Long John Neville. I mean, he'd done a book with Don Bain. He did a book about Candy Jones, obviously. But nobody really did a book about the genre of late-night talk show hosts dealing with paranormal. So in those conversations, can we talk about a few? In those conversations, Art would tell me, look, Art was in an enormous amount of pain. I mean, people don't realize that it's not this stabbing pain. It's this constant drilling with you every single day, every single night, while you try to breathe, because you've got COPD, so you're trying to breathe, and you're trying to stop smoking, and Art didn't stop smoking. I mean, he was still smoking. You've got that, but this constant pain. And at a certain point, one of the things about those painkillers, the Oxycontins and painkillers like that, you start building up a tolerance to those drugs over time. That's why people keep on taking more and more doses and higher doses and go to other kinds of drugs and mixtures of drugs that are really deadly. That's one of the problems. And then you do take the barbiturates just to get some sleep, because you've got to, because the pain is such. Well, remember, that's what killed Marilyn Monroe. It was the methamphetamines plus the Nambutol. And so he would talk about those things, and he was concerned about that. And he knew he was addicted to opioids. I mean, we weren't talking about, oh, am I really addicted? I can stop any time. It wasn't like that at all. So he was in agony. I mean, at least give him that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And even a year ago when he was in the hospital, there was so much concern over his health and where he was and what was going on. And we were all glad to see him rebound at that time, at least in the public eye, to seemingly kind of go back to somewhat of a normal life. Bill, it's been a pleasure. I always love catching up with you. One of my favorite guests on any show that we have. And I want to thank you for hanging in with us this evening and staying out late to do this and being a part of the tribute show and sharing memories of Art Bell and your insights. It's just great. And I really do appreciate you being here.
Sure thing. All my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill Birnes. And we'll have links up to all of our guests tonight at the website at midnightinthedesert.com, so you can find that information. Rounding out our aspect of the tribute show in this segment, Keith Rowland will join us at the top of next hour, and we'll push him and get as much information as we can from him in that hour together. But this has been so much fun, and hearing from so many people and the stories and ideas and thoughts behind this. Joining us now, Karen Jackson. And Karen, Art Bell sold her KNYE, very close friend. She's currently the owner and operator. And Karen, thank you for joining us this evening as we pay our final tribute and farewell to Art Bell. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
And, again, for our listeners, I appreciate and thank you so much for giving us the home back on KNYE for Midnight in the Desert and helping to continue this legacy and move it forward for as long as we possibly can, and continuing to entertain people and educate them around the world. I'd like to talk with you about... go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I've had very good feedback on your show, Dave. So I'm glad that you're on my radio station.
Well, it's where we belong. That is the desert, and it is our time to be with you there. So I appreciate that. Talk to our audience, if you would, Karen, about Art and share some of the insights and maybe some of the stories you wish you knew, or you wish the audience knew about this man.
Well, there's so many things about Art that people don't know. When he was away from the microphone, he was really different. He loved doing practical jokes. He's just a very different person, and also very humble. If he and I, before he got married to Erin, if we went out to dinner and there was a line, people would recognize him and they'd come up to him and say, "Oh, let us take you to the head of the line." And Art would say, "No, I'll wait in line." That's just how he was. And the practical jokes, I can't tell you all the jokes. he has pulled on me over the years. And it's one thing I truly, truly miss. But I do want to clear up something that Bill said. Art did quit smoking. He did quit smoking after he came out of the hospital.
Last year, after his stay in the hospital, he did quit? Okay.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He struggled with it, believe me, but he did quit.
I bet.
And Bill was right. Art was in constant pain, but he was very good at hiding that, to the point that a lot of us didn't really know how sick he was, because he did hide it very well.
It was somewhat noticeable to the fans over the last few years that Art had the interest in the radio. Was it the pain and the health issues that really distracted him from being able to stick with this and continue doing his passion?
No, I think it was his breathing. He really was having trouble breathing. And, being on the radio, you got to be able to breathe. And I think he just didn't want people to realize how bad his COPD was.
And that was his decision then to step down and pass the torch, to let the show continue on and be an active part behind the scenes and an active face on social media, but to kind of keep his legacy alive doing it that way. Yes.
And believe me, he missed it. He missed being on the radio, because we would talk about that. That was just in his blood.
And we've mentioned it tonight, Karen. Every guest is legacy. We all talk about this, and sometimes it feels like maybe the word legacy has lost some of its importance. But do you see that what he created with Coast to Coast, Dark Matter, and this Midnight in the Desert truly will live on to be the legacy that keeps Art Bell and his memory alive, aside from his beautiful children and his amazing wife? But I mean, do you think that this will be the way that he'll always kind of touch the lives and be a part of the world because of these type of programs?
Absolutely. I don't think Art will ever die to his fans. He will always be alive, and it's because of these shows. And he was very proud of these shows.
I've got to guess, right? I mean, because you could hear the passion and his interest in these shows and the topics that he talked about. And as we've heard from every one of the guests this evening, that that they were able to kind of weigh in on their perspectives of working with him and how he was so genial in the way he handled them. And, even with Richard Hoagland, people say, he allowed these things to happen, but he would push back, and he pushed on Richard quite often when it came to the Mars rocks and the face on Mars and the structures. And, he would push back, and he always did it. It seemed respectfully, but also with the idea of, I am interested. I think the world is interested in this, but I also want people to know I don't buy into everything that we talk about. And he had a great way of kind of handling that.
Well, yes, he did. In normal conversations with him, it was like that as well. But I don't think people realize how much preparation he did for every show. I mean, he would start early in the morning preparing for his show, so that when he went on, he knew it inside out and backwards.
Did you ever find, too, that he became obsessed with the programming and radio, or was it just a love and a hobby?
It was a love. It wasn't a hobby. It was a love. And I knew he was getting worse, because Art would go on the ham radio at night. And people were saying to me, Art hasn't been on the radio very much. And I knew that he was not doing well, because he loved doing the ham radio too.
When April 13th rolled around, was it a surprise to you, Karen, his passing, or was it something that behind the scenes you knew was coming?
Art, Art would give me little hints, but I wasn't paying attention like I should have. Just little things he would say to me, and I just thought he was being Art. But when I think back now, yes, he was telling me goodbye.
Was that, do you believe, in your opinion, a date that Art Bell chose? Do you think that was a point that he had come to in his life where he had just, instead of suffering through the COPD, the pain, the chronic breathing problems, that was a date he, Friday the 13th. I mean, if anybody's going to go out on a day like that, that seems to be Art Bell.
Yes, it is Art Bell. No, Art didn't do this, on purpose. He and I talked many, many times because I have COPD as well. And I would say, you know what, Art, you just got to keep fighting, take your medicine. You've got so much to live for. You've got a beautiful family, Art, you just got to keep fighting. It is hard when you can't breathe. It's very hard. But no, I think that was totally a coincidence. However, if there was a day he would have picked, it would have been that one, without a doubt.
Right, and I didn't mean necessarily in the sense of doing it purposely, but just in the fact of kind of realizing that it was winding down and choosing his way. And I know listeners around the world have been emailing me about the show and knowing that you were coming on and that you've remained very close with Aaron and the children, and they're wondering how are they doing? How are they holding up through this as well?
Well, Erin is a very strong young woman. She has good days, and of course she has bad days. She's listening this evening, and she's enjoying the show, but it does stir up memories for her. But they're doing as well as can be expected.
Understandable. And Aaron, for the audience around the world that was touched, as you've heard by many of the different guests that have joined us this evening, there is something remarkable about what your husband created and gave to the world. And we just want you to know that he'll always be forever in our hearts and thoughts. And we think and send nothing but the best in prayers and intentions to you and your family for a wondrous and magical future in this world, as I know Art would want it to be for all of you. Karen, you go ahead.
You extended the opportunity for Aaron to come on this evening, but she really didn't feel emotionally strong enough this evening to do that.
And we understood that. I just didn't want there to be this opportunity hanging that we didn't at least show the compassion and capacity to let her know that this will always be a part of her family, and she's always welcome to visit with us and share. And I didn't want this tribute show to go without at least extending that love to her, to let her know that we're here if she needs a place to come to. So that will always be an open door policy for me going forward, as long as I'm behind the microphone at this desk doing this show. So I hope she knows that. And if someday she finds a point that she'd like to come in and share Art Bell stories with us, we'll be waiting and we'll be here for her. Now you've had some fun stories, and we've talked off the air about it, and you believe Art is still kicking around, and you've had some fun experiences and some strange things happen. And I know for the paranormal fandom out there would love to hear some of that. And would you mind sharing a little bit of that with us?
Well, the thing that's been happening a lot is I'm still finding pennies. And I'd like to share that story. Art and I fought over a penny for at least 7 years. I had went to the store for him. I bought whatever he wanted. I came back. I put his change and a receipt on the table. Art counted the change, and he said, "You owe me a penny." So I reached in my pocket because I had put the change in my pocket. I said, "Well, the store must have shorted you because I don't have it." He wanted his penny. And I said, "I'm not giving you the penny." I mean, he said, "Karen, you're arguing with me over a penny." And I said, "Art, it's the same penny you're arguing with me about." So every time we would get together, he'd look at me and say, I'm still waiting for my penny. And I said, Art, I'm not giving you the penny. And this went on and on and on. So when he passed away, when I was at the funeral home, I put a penny in his pocket, and I told him, shut up about the penny now. Well, ever since then, I'm finding pennies everywhere. And I know it's Art. I found him in my closet. I found one in my shower. I find him in the on-air studio on the floor. And no one's been there that would have dropped a penny. So I know it's Art contacting me. He knows I'd know the penny.
Right.
So he's around. Believe me, I feel him. I talk to him all the time.
As
well as Aaron.
I'm sure that brings a lot of people around the world listening to the show as well a sense of peace, knowing that there is still that connection to all of you, and that although he's gone, he's not far from any of us, and where we're at.
Yeah, well, Art was really good at having these problems pop up, and I was his fix-it girl. And it's so funny because since he's passed, there have been little problems that have popped up. And I just look up and say, really, Art? I know this is coming from Art. I have no doubt. Believe me.
We've got about 3 minutes left together in the segment, Karen, and I want to make sure that you get your chance to share. And what would you like the world to know about your friend Art Bell and his love of radio?
Oh, yeah. I actually should have put a ham radio in the casket with him. That's how much he loved radio. That was his life. It didn't matter how he was feeling, because way back, Art was having problems when Ramona died. But I think what kept him alive was the radio. People don't realize what a very kind person he was. He really cared. I mean, if I got sick, even when he was in the Philippines, if I got sick, he would call me every day to make sure I took my medicine. And he'd stay on the phone to hear me take my medicine. And I would say to him, Art, this is self-centered of you. And he'd say, why? I said, because if I die, you're not going to have anybody to fight with. I mean, he called me every morning at 11 o'clock to discuss what we were going to argue about for the rest of the day. But see, I was the only one that would argue with him. Everybody else was, yes, Art, yes, Art. I'm not a yes, Art person. So he needed to keep me around just so he'd have somebody to argue with.
Somebody to make life interesting.
It was all in fun. Yeah, it was all in fun, because when push came to shove, Art was always in my corner, always. All the bickering aside, but we were like brother and sister, and brother and sisters fight.
And you are carrying on with KNYE. I've mentioned I'm going to be out there in Vegas for Super Bowl this year, and I'm going to make sure to take time out to come on out and visit with you and see the station and spend a little time on site with you. And I'm looking forward to that very much. And Karen, I can't tell you how much it meant to me and Keith and the Dark Matter Network that you were open-hearted to allowing the show back after it had been gone for a while, and bringing that back to the radio and bringing that crackle of life back to Pahrump. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. You have no idea how much that means to me that you saw the importance of bringing this back. So thank you, and thank you for being a part of our world.
It's it keeps Art alive.
And we will do our best, I promise you, going forward to make sure that that light continues to burn Karen Jackson, thank you. KNYE Radio, thank you. Our flagship station in Pahrump, Nevada. We are going to take a break, and when we come back, Keith Rowland, the man behind Dark Matter Digital Network and a longtime friend and associate of Art Bell, will join me as we talk about other insider stories and background stories and more. Stay tuned. That's coming your way. I'm Dave Schrader, and this is Midnight in the Desert. Welcome back. This is Midnight in the Desert. I am your host, Dave Schrader. On tonight, our tribute show for the late, great Art Bell. Long time coming, and I want to just, first of all, take a few moments before we launch into the final hour of our show to thank Michelle for stepping up and helping. We made this decision earlier this week when the news broke about Art's autopsy and the final word. And the three of us got together and said, there was never final show for Art to really pay honor and tribute. And, even though I gave a tip of the hat to him on my very first episode, there was never a tribute show that he so rightfully deserved on his final program, Midnight in the Desert. So we decided to shuffle our guests around, and Keith had already been scheduled to join us for the last hour, and to scramble and put together the menagerie of characters you've heard tonight was no easy feat. That was a Herculean task, and many of them jumped at the chance to be a part of the show this evening, and some of them were juggling schedules right up until the last minute. George Noory told me about 40 minutes before showtime, I'd like to be a part of this. I can do it. I can be there at the beginning of the show. I know many of you had hoped to hear George Knapp and a few others. It just, unfortunately, the time just did not permit for many of the guests to line up and be here. And I'm sure as we visit with them through time and history and share new stories, we'll revisit moments with Art Bell and their thoughts on that. And we'll do that in the future. Now I want to take a moment to welcome to the show somebody behind the scenes who's a big part of championing to keep a program like this going. In the face of sometimes insurmountable odds, he has been working diligently to keep things going and has earned a strange reputation and a horrible nickname. And I am here to help try to clear up some of the misnomers and get to some of the behind-the-scenes stories and understandings of our final guest for the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, the evil Dark Lord himself behind Dark Matter Digital Network, Mr. Keith Rowland. Keith, thank you for coming on and agreeing to do this.
Well, no problem, Dave. Can you hear me all right?
You're coming through great.
All right, good.
You lucked out, man. I was supposed to get you in here for 2 hours tonight, but we had such a great grouping of guests that they slowly whittled away at your time, and you're getting off easy. But
that was my evil plan.
I know, all along. Let's tackle that up front. There's been a lot said and done, and I want to get to the beginnings of your story with Art Bell. So let's get in there, and we'll eventually work our way to the moniker Evil Keith. But how did you and Art Bell become, partners in crime, working in radio and doing what you've done for the last 20-some years?
Oh, well, it was way back in 1992. I moved out to Arizona in '89. I had a successful business I was running out of Michigan, and we took the product that I was producing and made it a nationwide product so I could go anywhere in the country and do my job. And I did, and we moved out. I quit. I didn't want to shovel my weather anymore, so I moved out to Arizona and continued the business. And so now I'm like just an earshot down the road from KDWN, and being a software programmer, we tend to work late at night, and lo and behold, tune into the dial, and here comes Art Bell. Now, back at that time, he was more of a political show, and he was practically all open lines every night. He didn't have guests on. He just, crack the mic open and talk a little bit about the news for 15 minutes, and then line one, you're on the air, or east of the Rockies, and there he was. And we had all kinds of characters. And so I was listening to that for many, many months. And then he started up that Dreamland program because he wanted to search a little bit of the paranormal. And he started that on Sunday night, I believe it was. And he still did the political show 5 days a week, and he did the paranormal show on Sunday called Dreamland. Actually, he called it... I think initially it might have been like Area 2000 or something. I don't know. It was a weird name. It eventually got changed to Dreamland. And so what happened is he he had a bulletin board, a dial-up modem, single phone line bulletin board system at his house that people could converse on, anytime during the day, one at a time. And when he started doing these paranormal shows, this was around the time when we had these weird alien pictures and alien autopsy and some of those early pictures. And so he would put them on the bulletin board, but, only one person at a time could dial in and grab it. Well, right around this time is also when the internet was starting to get well known, let's say. People were switching from their CompuServe and their Prodigy accounts and getting on the real internet. And when you opened up an internet account, and some of the old timers remember, when you open up your Slip account, you get to have a little space on their web server. And so I signed up with a company called PrimeNet, who was in Phoenix, and you'd get this. You could be www.primenet.com/tilde, and then your username, and mine was Keith R. And so I got this free web space, and I teeter along with it here or there, do that, and finally, when Art starts bringing more of the paranormal to his weekday show and start covering those topics and bringing on a Hoagland and bringing on a Whitley who had some visuals, I said, there's not much interesting about me to put on a website, so why don't I put some of Art's material on my web space and make a page for him. And so I could go to the bulletin board, grab down these images, and I put them up on the page. And so now the Art Bell website was http://www.primenet.com/tilde/keithR/artbell.html. How do you like that one?
That rolls right off the tongue.
It rolled off tongue. So I would send Art an email and say, hey, I got your stuff up here in this URL here. And it's like, yeah, okay. And it took a few times, and eventually he started mentioning the webpage on the radio, and it would take that long to read out this crazy thing. Well, as time goes on, as I say, to make a long story short, he eventually emailed me back and asked me to call him. And so I called him back one day, and he said, well, do you want to make this thing kind of official and run the web page for the show? And I said, sure, it looks like that's what I was kind of trying out for. And so right around the same time, I think a few weeks or a few months afterwards, we finally were able to, the internet evolved to the point where you could get a domain name and you could get artbell.com. You didn't have to have all that other crap to make a website work. But it had to be on a dedicated server. You could only have one domain name on a server. You could point domains to the server, but in order to have them divide up into different pages. So for a while there, we were artbell.com/artbell HTML. So that wasn't even. No. So later on, the web develops even more. And keep in mind, I'm still developing these web pages in hard coding HTML. There's no such thing as content management systems. There's no fancy software out there. There's hardly even a PHP language that's even working out there. So it's all being hand coded. Eventually, the web server software gets advanced enough where you can run multiple domains in the same server, and so we were able to then get a bigger server at a company and add our domain to it. And we were now officially just artbell.com. So that probably happened certainly within the first year of when we got hooked up there. And from that point on, I just kept updating the page, listening to the show. We got into some audio recordings. I would record the show off of the satellite. At the time, I had a 10-foot C-band satellite dish, and I could pull off the show from the network off the satellite before it went off to the affiliates. And I could record the show, and then when funny things would come up, I could take that sound clip and create a real audio file. If anybody remembers real audio, put it up on the webpage, you had some audio clips to listen to. So we had images and we had audio clips, and we would get some newsy articles that Art would read. We'd put links to that up on the webpage, and we were off and running. We were doing what we were calling radio with pictures, and Richard Hoagland picked up on that right away because he had lots of pictures. We had Face on Mars, we had Europa, we had all kinds of stuff, and so things started going along there. And then as Art would have Whitley and Hoagland and Linda Moulton Howe and David John Oates, and I'm leaving somebody out, I was doing their web pages. There was no people out there that could do a lot of these web pages. And so I'm running Hoagland's site and Linda Howe and Whitley's and all these people. I get them going. And again, I'm hard coding HTML. It's very basic. It's simple. And I'm able to handle it for a little while. But then as we got bigger and these other people had more work that needed to be done on a website, they got passed off to other people, and I just stuck with art. And we just had a good time from that point on. And so then he got into the mode where if somebody would send him some pictures, he'd call me up, say, "Hey, check your email." And so, "Okay, I got a new picture. Yeah, put it up there. I'm going to talk about it tonight." "Okay," put it up there and talk to it, about it. And so that's kind of the way things, lasted for year after year after year. Of course, I went through a bunch of his retirements and returns and retirements and returns, and that's other stories. But that's kind of how we got started. He didn't pay me to do the website, and I didn't pay him for the rights to do it. The way it worked out is I complimented his show and made his show more compelling by having the website, and I just ran advertising and sold the author books and some banner ads. And so whatever money I could make off the webpage, as long as that paid me to put time in, I did. And as long as he got a benefit out of it, because having all this other stuff that you could talk about on your radio show that no other hosts were doing. I mean, this was bleeding edge at this point to have this capability out there. Eventually, other people caught on, and eventually, as time moves along, and the show was bought by J-Core and Premiere, and then Premiere's got art, and it's like, oh, well, am I still going to do the webpage? Oh, come on over here and help us do Rush Limbaugh's webpage and Dr. Laura's webpage and all these other people. It's like, good grief. So I'm dragging Premiere Radio into the new age, and so that's another story if you want to go there. But let me stop there and see where you want to go.
I love hearing the kind of background and how you get into that, because, my actual foray into the paranormal entertainment world was very similar with the guys from the Ghosted Hunters TV show. And I just sent a simple email regarding their tech issues that they were having on the show. And that began a friendship that really kind of booted it. And when I thought about doing a radio show, looking at the paranormal, Jason and Grant were behind me and pushed me into that spotlight and got me into public speaking at live events. And it really kind of took hold. So it's funny that you and I, as we're continuing to learn about each other, have these interesting parallels of how we come into other people's lives, which has brought us to this point as well. I want to know, if you don't mind opening up about it. I mean, there's been a lot of ups and downs in the career, from coast to coast to, his retirement to coming back to retiring again, coming back with Dark Matter Digital Network and stopping that to come back and do Midnight in the Desert. What kept you in that groove when so many other people would have just walked away and thought, you know what, enough's enough. It's time to move on. Why did you stick with this?
Okay, well, to make a long story longer now, the first time, and a lot of people may not know these things, the first time Art quit abruptly was when rumors got out about his son and being molested by a gym teacher at school. And I'm thinking this is the first one. This might have been the second. You got to remember, I'm 61 years old, and my memory will fail. I'm really bad on dates, so this is just as according to the Gospel of Keith. This is all I can report on. The news of this went public, and what had happened is shortly afterwards, because Art's son was Art Bell the Fourth, and we went out in a press release, and then there was this shortwave radio show that came on a few weeks or months after that picked up on this news about Art Bell and child molesting. And they just kind of threw that out there and made the assumption that, Art Bell, he's been convicted of being a child molester, not even reading into the details. So, of course, that threw Art in a tizzy. It was total fabricated stuff. And so he wanted to sue the radio station and program and person for defamation of character, which was obviously his right to do so. But this is the first time when Art really started hating Premiere, and that's because Premiere would not provide the support or the lawyers or the legal team to help fight that, and Art had to do it on his own. So he basically stormed out and said, I'm going to quit doing the program, and I have to deal with this. And so that was that. So I'm like, okay. We kind of put the website on hold for a little while. And meanwhile, I'm still doing my software programming. So I still got some income from these other things. And just kind of waited out. And I think after a few weeks, he came back. He got his legal matters, started and was moving on down that road. And I guess decided he missed the radio show. And so he, I guess, just, bit his tongue and came back, and we were up and running again. So now we're going off and doing some other things. And there was another couple times when something would come up and he felt he couldn't carry on with the show, whether it was going to be forever or whatever the case was. And then that would get resolved, and he could come back. And so he did, and we're up and running again. So this went on for a couple times at least, and then 2002 rolls around, and we've been doing this now for almost 10 years. Part of it on our own with him and me and Alan and the crew, and then part of it with Premier there. And so then Premier and I are working together to do some, get the advertising, promote the show. I'm working on helping them build up a multiple server farm for Art's site and for Rush's site and so on. And so about 2002 rolls around, and Art's kind of hanging up for good. And I don't know if there's any specific issue, but I don't remember. But we planned for an actual date that he was going to be his last day. And so the end of 2012, New Year's Eve, he's going to do his prediction show or something that he likes to do. And that was it. And so we had time to plan for it. And this is when I produced a CD-ROM. I copied everything that was on the website for the last 10 years and put it all in a CD-ROM. And I made it available as a collectible item for Art's show. And for the last 30 days of his show, I was able to advertise that. And that helped, pay for a lot of my expenses and doing that. And that helped set me up for a little while. And so between what I was getting for Amazon, selling Amazon books, which the percentage was pretty good back then, and banner advertising, and then selling the CD-ROM, I had a good chunk of change to live on for a while Art was retired, and I'd go off and try to find something else to do. Because it's right around this time that I'd given up on my software program that I was working on because the customer base was dwindling. I was wrote software for the TV repair business, and they just, they went away more and more because everything's throwaway electronics now. So I was pretty much doing Art's page full time until 2002. So then I don't follow him anymore because surprised as you might be, I really wasn't a fan of the paranormal, and so
what?
Oh my God, did I say that?
What?
I'm sorry. I was a fan of Art.
Charlatan. Art
did a show that was entertaining. Right. He could, like people would say, he could read the phone book and you'd listen. So, I wasn't, I think I helped out a little bit during the time that Mike Siegel was on, and we had some fill-in hosts for a while. So a couple of those semi-retirements, I got to take some time off and come back. I worked with a few other people. But when he finally quit in 2002, then Premier wanted to take over the website, and they didn't think about registering coasttocoastam.com like I did, so I had to sell it to them. So I was able to make a little more money there. So they took over running.
Always the forward thinker.
Yeah, I'm telling you. So they got the domain, and that's when they built a new website with a different crew, and George Noory came on board, and then that's where that went. Then I find out later that, Art's coming back doing weekends, and he went to the Philippines, and he's doing it from there. But I never listened to those shows because I was really not a fan of listening to paranormal 5 nights a week, let alone, even on the weekends, not really following it. I mean, I took some of the money I earned and went off and started or worked with some startup companies and gave some venture capital to a couple, 2, 3, 4, 5 different companies and see where it would go. And some worked out fine, some didn't work out fine, but we lived on that.
Right, your ways just separated for quite a bit. Was there much butting heads with Art Bell at all during your time and work with him?
Well, not so much during the first phase, let's say, before he retired. We got along pretty well. He's obviously intimidating if you're working with him. You know, he's demanding, he's competitive. He likes to see things certain ways. Don't let me...
Thank God you don't have to deal with a guy like that anymore, huh?
Really, let me make a note here, Dave. Okay. Remind me to come back and talk about the April Fool's jokes. I didn't write those down. Then wife and I, we sold our big house and bought a 40-foot diesel pusher RV, and we hit the road for 5 years. And we just traveled around the country 2 or 3 times and that was our retirement. Because then we come back into Arizona. Now my daughter's got grandkids, and grandma wants to stay home now and settle down, buy a house, and we can, help raise the grandkids. So now we're talking right around 2012. This is before dark matter, and we're going around, looking at different houses. And one day, out of the blue, I get a phone call from Art Bell. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Wow, what's going on? He says, well, I'm coming to the near end of my 10-year non-compete clause with Premiere. And I says, some fella from Sirius XM offered me a show. And I said, interesting. And he says, I think I want to take it. And then he says to me, you want to take a ride? And from that point on, I got suckered into it again. I thought I was all done with art and all done with the paranormal, and I said, well, Art, let me think about it for a day. Will you give me 24 hours to think about it if I want to get back into this? And not 5 seconds after I hung up the phone, my wife says, are you nuts? Of course you're going to take it. Now call him back.
And that began your
and then,
spiral into hell again.
Right. So artbell.com had been dormant for quite a while. And I said, well, Art, he called, this was like in August of 2012. We didn't come back until, no. See, now here's where I'm bad on dates. Anyway, it was a couple months before he was going to actually come on the air. He signed the contract like in July, and he wasn't going to come on the air until September 13th or something, because it had to be exactly 10 years from when his Premiere contract ended. He could come back on the air and compete. But he signed the contract a couple months before, so we knew we were going to do this, and there was going to be a press release. And so we sneakily brought artbell.com back on, and I had it running on my servers, and all I put on the page was 3 little question marks in the middle of the screen and just waited for people to find it. And sure enough, I think it was people in BellGab and places like that. It says, artbell.com's up again and running again. And they would say, what does that mean? What's going to be happening with art? They had no clue what was going to happen, had no idea this was going to be a return. So then they found out that I had a little tracking code on there to track the hits, and it was all part of my master account that also included Enterprise Mission, Hoagland site, which I was still doing. So everybody determined, whatever Art's doing, Keith Rowland's involved, let's watch what's going to happen. And then the question marks turned into exclamation points, and then the exclamation points turned into a progress bar that went across the screen, 10%, 20%, information coming, and this went on for like a week or two. I was just stringing people along.
I remember. I was one of the addicts checking the site, wondering what was going on. That was it.
Everybody was checking back every day. And so then the day that the press release was going to be publicized, then we turned on the page on the website, Art Bell's returning to XM Radio, blah, 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 and gave it all out there. So that was kind of fun coming back. And then we had a little while. I wasn't involved in all of the, the transmission, the production, or even the archives or anything. There was no, people had to buy an XM radio or an XM online subscription to listen to the show. I was just back going to do the website again, listen to the show, and this is also when his friend Paul Bowman became his producer, another ham buddy. And most people know the rest of the story. That lasted about 5 weeks. We ran a week of replays, and SiriusXM wasn't serious about their online streaming presence, because most of our good listeners were people listening at home on their on their computers. The other half of the audience was the people listening in the car, and at midnight or 10 o'clock at night, it's mostly truck drivers. And so you had that the noisy cell phone flying down the freeway at 70 miles an hour with the window open. And it was all crappy sounding audio, and so that wasn't very exciting. But we got that going, and everybody got a free 30-day trial. So we had a lot of people signed up, and a lot of subscriptions were signed up. And so we were moving along pretty well, week after week, 3 weeks, 4 weeks in, and people was complaining that the streaming player on XM wasn't working very well, and were they going to be able to fix it? And so we were kind of begging Sirius to fix it, or what can you do? He says, how about this? Can you at least let us stream it on our own website while you guys are fixing yours, so that we can retain some listeners and some members? And they refused. And I'll tell you what happened after that, after the break, huh?
All right, you're the boss. Let's take a break. We'll come back. I'm Dave Schrader. This is Keith Rowland. You're listening to Midnight in the Desert. Welcome back. This is Midnight in the Desert. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Keith Rowland, my special guest. And I'll tell you what, I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you've all had a lot of fun tonight. 2.5 hours have bled by. I feel like we're cheating ourselves. And Keith, let's extend the show an extra hour tonight. What do you think? Will you hang in with me for one more hour? We'll go 4 hours in honor of Art Bell and extend it for this one night only.
Well, if my voice holds out, that'll be fine, because I've only gotten through 20% of my notes. I don't know about you.
Well, we'll do some rapid fire as we go along, but
sure.
All right.
Well, let's talk more about art this half hour, and then we can get into some of my background more later if people are interested that way.
Right. Well, and it's all interwoven, so we will get into that. But you were wrapping up a story. Let's get back into this. So you come back in for Dark Matter and launch this thing, and their XM series doesn't seem to be working real well with you guys on worrying about keeping people connected while they're trying to get their things together.
Right.
So does Art start seeing the writing on the wall pretty early on that this may not be the home for Art Bell?
Well, here's what happened, and I forgot to mention that. While probably for a week or two before the end, I said, Art, I can put streaming servers online there and have them work 1,000 times better than what they're doing. They've got this streaming player on their website that when it gets one little hiccup, it just errors out and stops playing. It doesn't retry anything. He says everybody else is streaming out there. Their players, if it gets a hiccup, okay, you get a little glitch, you get a little wobble, and the thing continues running. Why can't XM do this? And they just didn't do it. So I built, I paid for and built up a server and tested it, and people might remember I was beta testing it. I was streaming out on there, and I says, "Look, we can do it," and they still refused to let us do it. So what had happened is the 30 days ran out, and so I would say the majority of all of our online home-based users they didn't re-up because they were frustrated with the player too. He says, let's hope Art can make something happen here. Let's hope they can get back on the air. But in the meantime, they weren't going to pay XM for something that didn't work. So the following week after all of those 30-day subscriptions expire, the phone call volume dropped to about 20% of what he was getting. And every call was a truck driver driving down the road with his XM radio and his cell phone with the windows open and the horns blaring and fluttering down the road. And so every call was that. And Art just eventually got sicker and sicker and sicker and tired of it, to the point where he kind of gave them an ultimatum. He says, look, you guys need to fix this or let us fix it or I'm out of here. And he gave him like a 24-hour, and they just said, okay, goodbye. They had no loyalty to Art, no reason to want to fix the problem. They gave us an excuse that, well, working on a whole new streaming platform, and when it's ready, it'll be ready. But, we were willing to save the show and provide the live streaming we weren't taking away people from subscribing. People had XM radios, and all those subscriptions would probably still hang around there. But we were just going to offer an audio feed live. They still had all the archives. If people wanted to listen the next day, they'd still have to have a subscription. They'd go to the website. They could download the program. They could listen to all the archives. All we wanted to do was provide the live feed. So when this all finally blew up, they played like 1 week of replays while this final thing was going on in discussions. And then they pulled the plug and they put something else on. So at that point, Art and I decided, well, we can really put this together. We can build our own internet radio station and bring you back. And he says, yeah, well, there's one problem, Keith. So what's that? 2-year non-compete. Oh, well, at least it's only 2 this time.
Right.
So
right.
It's okay. Well, I guess we've got a lot of time to build up a radio station. So in a matter of a week or so, I got my streaming stuff set up, and I got the computers lined up and found some software that could play some stuff. And I said, tell you what, while we're waiting for you, why don't I build a paranormal internet radio network? And I have to credit Paul Bowman, who kind of helped along with the idea. And I honestly will tell you, Dave, I knew of no other paranormal radio network out there. Come to find out, there probably was 3 or 4 already out there and running, but I was clueless. I was in my own little world here. I said, let me build it up, and I'll go off and try to find some podcasts that have good production values. The audio's good. They're stable and do a weekly show responsibly and repetitively. And so I gathered and contacted all these people and got some shows on the network. And then I says, okay, you do a great show. How would you like to do it live? I said, oh, that'd be great. And so I started doing live paranormal shows. We use our Skype, and we do these 1-hour shows, and we'd start like at 5 o'clock, and we do a 5 to 6 show, and a 6 to 8 show, and a 8 to 10, or whatever we did. I did like 4 or 5, maybe 4 live shows a day during the week, and I had a couple over the weekends too. So it kept me busy, but it made me hone my craft. We did the live shows. They got recorded. They got put back up on the archives, and then they got replayed overnight. So you got like 5-6 hours of live programming, and then just repeated overnight the next day until the next set of live shows. And so that kept me pretty hopping busy, and so we got some pretty good shows. And this is when Jimmy Church discovered us, and he talked me into putting them on, and we put them on for a day, and then we went to 2 days, and then we went to 3 days. Each week we kind of extended it, and he got pretty popular. He seemed to be we put him in a good time slot, 7 to 10, and so he garnered quite an audience, and the rest is history there. So Coast liked him so much they took him away from me, but there's a star I helped create. For those who don't know,
and you'd reached out to a few other putzes to try to bring him in, and that one guy, what is that pompous ass Darkness Dave fella? You offered him a spot on the old Dark Matter network, and he just kind of ignored you and shut you down. Didn't he?
I had, and I had another guy. that I offered it to, and he says, "Nah, I don't think you're good enough for me." He just went off and did his own thing. I'll tell you. At least I didn't say that. No, I'll tell you off the air who that was if I didn't already.
At least I didn't say that. I just was. We were locked in and couldn't share the stream and what we were doing currently. Yeah. We were with Premiere.
Yeah, well, you always had a real job. Radio. All these other people, they didn't. This was their hobby. They had no commitments to anybody other than to turn on the mic and do some recording. So we built up a little following, and I was, Art and I talked during the whole time and says, let's put these guys on there and see if we can find the next Art Bell. Someday when you come back and you retire again, maybe somebody can just, fit right in and kind of gather an audience. And so we tried to do that. And like I said, Jimmy was coming along pretty well, and then he kind of, in my opinion, it went to his head, and he started doing a whole together different kind of show than what I was, interested in. And but he was the right kind of personality for somebody else, and so I'll tell you a funny story there. It involved Jimmy and Art and myself. So Jimmy's coming along real well on our network, and he gets asked to, it was either guest host or come on and do an interview or a segment on the show with George, I think it was at the time. And Jimmy and I are talking about this would be a great way to promote Dark Matter Digital Network. He says, we'll get the big guys to recognize us and promote my show, and we'll get people that'll tune in. And says, oh, okay, that sounds like a decent idea. Says, let's see if we can develop that. And so we start talking about that and starting to line that up, and Art gets wind of it. Now you got to think back, and this totally was absent to my mind because I had been away from Art for so long, is Art hates their guts. He would not want to have anything to do with Premiere. He would not want any show at all that has anything to do with his network on Premiere. And so he was so livid about it that he actually he actually turned off artbell.com so I couldn't run it anymore. Pulled the plug. So you're going to do that, you know? So I says, well, I says, let's talk about it another day. And we got Jimmy on the phone and Art on the phone and myself. And we had a conference call, if you will. Now, at the time, Art didn't want to give Jimmy his phone number, and Jimmy really didn't want to give Art his phone number. So I just kind of conferenced him in on my phone, and we talked about it. And Jimmy's making his case, and Art's making his case, and I'm kind of trying to mediate between the two. And I think we finally came up. I think then by like the next day, Art decided that, well, maybe it would be an interesting idea to see if we can get some promotion out of this. And so Jimmy went on, and everything was all back to normal again. The website was back, and we proceeded on, and we kept, building the network and so on. And so as we were getting closer and closer to Art coming back, we were looking at, maybe we'd like to have a show after my show's over here. Maybe Richard Hoagland would like to do a live show. And so that started up. And so they were all going to come back on July the 20th, which was the anniversary of the moon landing. And it was the end of his non-compete. And so both Art and Richard were going to start on that July the 20th, that famous July the 20th. And I had to then... thank goodness I had a programming background, an audio background, a computer background, and all these different talents that I had to accrue over my years, and then had to learn some new stuff. I had to find and build a subscription system, find and build a way to post files that were protected, and then we talked about increasing the streaming capacity. We went from this discount streamer to some highfalutin, big, giant, multiple server people, and we negotiated with them, and it was a lot of work to get all this work done. And I'm going to come back to something, but anyway, we got him on the air, and things were rolling around pretty well. Art's still very competitive, and he's very demanding, and we've had a time or two where I felt like, he's so demanding, and I don't know whether I can meet his demands, and I feel like I'm going to get fired any day now, and so on, because he pulled the plug once. He's going to do it again someday. So we just finally muddled through that, and we had to deal with music licensing and advertising, and we had to work through all the stuff. We had Art and I were negotiating with, as we can probably tell now, with TuneIn. TuneIn wanted to help us put Art Bell on the internet and provide their player, and maybe include him in some premium package thing. And so we probably negotiated for 6 weeks during that summer, trying to figure out what it would cost and what was their share, what was our share, who would do the advertising, blah, 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 on and on. And so Art and I are on the phone 3-4 times a day discussing this thing. And we would agree with them verbally on the phone, and then the lawyers would send something back and it was like, this isn't what we agreed to. No, we can't do that. They were holding Art to a minimum number of shows and hours, and if he didn't make it, then we're going to deduct this and withhold that, and was like, this was just crazy. This is supposed to be some handshake friendly deal that we'll do a show, and if you want to carry it, that's wonderful. And so at some point, it says, and TuneIn was going to pay for the music. I says, you are, huh? It says, well, you realize it's going to cost you blah, 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 blah. And if we have blah, 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 blah number of listeners, you sure you can do it? And they muddled around and checked with their lawyers and here, there, and everywhere. And they were coming back with these huge numbers that they were going to practically take all the money that was going to be earned to pay for this thing, because they were farming it out to somebody else. So eventually, after we go around, and Art and I are getting more and more discussed with these people, finally somebody over there, who I won't mention, says, you guys can probably do this yourself. You don't even need us. And I'm thinking, yeah, you're probably right. And so sure enough, I built this Google spreadsheet, and I was plugging in the numbers, and I built this thing. It says how many listeners we're going to have, and how many bumper music, how many breaks are we going to have, and how many songs are we going to have, and what's going to be our subscription price, and how many subscribers will we have, and how many live listeners will we have, and how many advertisers, and what will we charge for those ads. And I plugged all these numbers in there, and we messed around for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, plugging in different numbers, different scenarios, trying to figure out, Art, can we do this? Can we do this on our own? Can Dark Matter Digital create Midnight in the Desert and roll with this? And after a while, I think I convinced Art that we could do this, that the price is this. We can earn that. We're going to have this many numbers, and we're just roll the dice. So I says, we haven't got much more money that we need to invest in this. We've pretty much got this platform ready to go. And so, sure enough, what was really fortunate is we were able to pre-sell subscriptions. So instead of you paying, we were pre-selling like a month before. So instead of buying 30 days, but we weren't even going to be on for 30 days, it's like, okay, today you sign up, you get 60 days. You get 30 days of nothing, and then the 30 days that you're going to have when art comes back. And then the next day it would be a 59-day subscription. Next day would be a 58-day subscription. And so we wheeled it down so that by the time July the 20th came around, if you signed up, you got your 30 days. So we had a lot of good pre-orders. And so Art was really encouraged by that. And he says, yeah, I think we can do this. And so we started booking guests, and we had the Michio Kaku and a lot of his favorites, showed back up again, and we were off and rolling. And then it's probably, I don't know if I want to go into why that all fell apart. Everybody that's kind of up to date and current as to why the show dropped in the first place, and we can talk about what happened afterwards in the next hour. But that's kind of where that went along.
Well,
so we had our ups and downs. There are
some people, but there are a lot of new listeners that have come along and aren't familiar with the story. But Art, you launched the program and brought it back, and there were issues. Now I'm curious, as you knew Art, it sounded like there was still a lot of passion, and he was concerned about continuing and keeping a dark matter alive and doing what it took to get it moving and keep it pushing forward at all times. And it was just Sirius XM that kind of dropped the ball on that whole subject. When you came back and ignited Midnight in the Desert and realized that you had this and you set it off, did you sense, or was it just the music aspect of it when he was balking and saying, if there's no music, I don't want to do the show? Or did you get the sense, as many of and I'm asking because this has been, as a listener, I question this as well, was his heart really in coming back? Was the theory of it more exciting than the actual doing of it?
Well, I've come to realize some of that, too, is there's a lot of excitement in building something. And then once it comes to execution, it starts, I guess, wearing off and maybe getting more boring. But he was into doing the show. The music was a part of it. That we had a lot of discussion on that because even the people on his Facebook page said, Art's not the music, just come back through the show. We'll write you some music. We'll put some non-commercial music in there. That doesn't matter. We just want you to be back on the air. And then Art's on the other side saying, well, look, the music is the whole basis of what gets me going for the show. It's a very integral part of it. And if I can't have my bumper music, I don't know if I want to do it at all. And so that's what brought out all this negotiations with TuneIn and us doing our own calculations and negotiations and reading the rule of the law. We had to become part lawyer and part negotiator and so on. So he still wanted to do it. And he was realizing that I was competent enough to pull off all these things that needed to be done because all I did before just do a web page. Well, now I'm like, he says, well, I got to have a break when for my commercial break. He says, yeah, no problem, Art. I can play all the commercials here. I got a little mixing board. You just come in and mix up, and then when you go to break, I'll play the commercials. I'll play the little thunderclap that tells you when to come back. Oh, okay. And then Joe Talbot from Telos jumped in and he gave us the phone system that he ended up using. He gave us this zip device that allows us to have this two-way communications between his studio and my studio. And so we had some pretty good equipment. And then we had this streaming device which allows you can send out 4 different streams. And it turns out when we had this big redundant fault-tolerant streaming company that we paid lots of money for, you could feed MP3 stream and an AAC stream to one location and an AAC and an MP3 to a second location. So if any one of them failed, you had a way to hear the program. So we had some pretty good stuff. I mean, he was getting excited about having a state-of-the-art internet radio station. And I'm going, okay, I hope we can pull this off because there's a lot of other factors here, and there's a lot of single point of failure too. Any one of these things goes out, and we're done for the night. So just keep that in mind. We don't have the resources of a big corporate station. Anyway, did I answer the question? I forgot the question now.
We politely danced around a lot of it, but the question was, did he still have an interest, or was it starting to wane? Was the excitement of it more than the actual?
No, I think he was excited.
Execution.
He was excited to do the show every night. He really was, because he put demands on the producers. We went through 1, 2. I don't remember now. Heather was like the second or third producer that he finally hit it off with, but we went through a couple that Art didn't get along with, and he was too demanding on stuff. He wanted things right. We had a code of ethics. We had a production value level that everybody had to meet, and so people had to have their sound checks, and they had to have good notes about what they're going to talk about, and so we strived to put on a good program the best we could every night. In fact, one of the first weeks that we came back, we had Bashago on, and so Bashago, I guess we did a sound check with this other producer, and okay, yeah, you sound okay. And then he comes on. This was not you, Michelle. Don't worry about it. He comes on, and he's got this hum in the background, and it's like, what is that hum? Because you hear it because you wear headphones, so anything that's going on the other line, you're going to hear it, including my air conditioning that's running because I'm not in a soundproof booth. So you put up with my noise there. So Art cancels the interview. He says, well, I can't do it this way because I can't be listening to this hum in my headphones all night long during an interview. So he says, we'll have to rebook you for another night. And he just went to open lines. He said, he wanted to put on a good show. He always did. And sure enough, after a couple days, the guy got another telephone and plugged it in the wall, and everything was fine, and we did a show, and everything was good. But I think he still had his heart in it. You'd think the first thing that he would do is, if he really wasn't into it, is he wouldn't care about the quality of it. And so the fact that he did to the very end, I think, spoke volumes of how he wanted that show done. Those things that happened to him, the story goes that there was a person who wanted Art to advertise something on the show. And this person gave Art the product, and Art gave it back to him and said, this is crap, I'm not going to advertise this, just go away. And we feel that this was the guy that started the harassing of Art, with the driving down the road, shooting at the studio, with telephone call threats, with hiding out in the desert there when Art comes out to go from his house to the studio, cracking a couple gunshots off to him, just because he just hated him because Art wouldn't comply and carry his thing. And so he was a local person in Pahrump, and so he had all the time that he could to sit there and harass Art. And it was not that Art was scared, okay? He would put up with it if he had to, but having the cops show up almost twice a week or more was scaring the family. And that's why he decided he couldn't do it anymore, is because he didn't want to put the family through this. He said, I can put up with it. I can get through this. And I'm not scared of these people. I got I'm packing over here in the studio. Anybody gets close, man, they're going to get it. Matter of fact, I think he did jump outside the studio one night with his pistol and saw somebody run off the property who was around messing around. But the one time that, he came after he reported the incident and the cops were there, and after that all kind of way, he went back into the house, and the family was just visibly shaken and scared of what is going on here, Art. And the next day he decided, that's it. I'm not putting my family through it. But he like Karen was saying, he sorely missed it. He really still wanted to do it. And I'm sorry that he didn't either. So, and that's when the search went on.
During the conversation with Karen, she also alluded to the fact that the pain was so bad and his breathing was so painful that she thinks that also helped factor into making that final decision. Did you see a steady decline in his health, or was he good at hiding that from you as well?
Well, I think he was pretty good at the point he quit. But then when Heather came on to take over, filling in, it was planned on that he could fill in for her whenever she couldn't do it, or he would come in unannounced and just do a show, maybe once a week, or something. But he didn't want to be regularly scheduled to expose himself as he walked from the house to the studio. So it's always have to be some unannounced, unscheduled, appearance. And so he was all for doing that, as long as that reduced the violent attacks. So he ended up doing one show, but I think the decline was happening then. As time went on, he was more encouraging her to continue on, and he was less and less willing to fill in from the standpoint of, I don't know if I can do a last-minute thing. If Heather's having a migraine headache, an hour before the show, I don't feel I can just come in and do a show. I said, well, all right, you can just come in there and do open lines and whatever. And so he kind of little by little backed away from committing to that. And and then obviously he got worse and worse to the point where, he couldn't breathe well enough to carry on the show. And so it was all Heather all the time. And that's where it went. And we can talk more about that later if we want to. So, but I think he really wanted to do it. I think he really wanted to do it to answer your question. Certainly,
we'll cover that. We've got a lot of questions from listeners, and I want to try to speed round some of that when we come back. And I know it's hard because there's a lot of backstory, and you gave some great information on a lot of things people have speculated about. Plus, we all need to know where the nickname originally came from, Evil Keith. And, was there an animosity or was it a tongue-in-cheek nickname that was thrown your way? How did Heather Wade take over the show? And what was it like once the show transferred from Art Bell into the new realm? And we want to hear about that and so much more. Listen, stick with us, folks. We've got an additional hour of the best in anomalous talk radio coming your way this evening.
As they say, we'll have to say,
man, the myth, Art Bell.
As we say, we'll have to sign off our normal affiliates, and we'll just carry on the internet.
And you can find it all at midnightinthedesert.com. Stay tuned. More coming your way. Honey, I'm not coming home yet.